It's now time for November's edition of Ask the Mayor with Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. She has to speak quickly because she has to light 4,000 Christmas trees in the next month.
Right.
If you've got a question for the mayor.
And menorahs, and trellises, and a variety of... Yes.
In any case, you can call or text her with a question at 877-301-8970. If you're here at the Boston Public Library, Ethan is right there. Raise your hand, Ethan, so they know you are. Ethan, our colleague, he's happy to take a question, and if it's borderline reasonable, we will let you ask it of the mayor. Mayor Wu, it's wonderful to see you. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
Always fun. Great, big crowd today, too.
Yeah, thank you very much. They came to see you. They never come to
sure
see us.
Seldom come to see us. That's
no,
for
they
sure.
came to see you, Mayor Wu. But we'll take them, whatever reason they came. So, very good election in the city of Boston for you. The people that you supported in the city council went undefeated. You got Henry Santana, Sharon Durkin, Enrique Jose Papin. Am I forgetting someone? There's a fourth person, I think. Ben Weber. All these people were on your slate of preferred candidates. They all won. So does that make your life easier, or what does that mean for the city of Boston? Less of a hassle for you with the city council, or what?
You know, I know there's been a lot of conversation about the city council over the last term, and as someone who has come from that very important body, you know, I know how fundamental the city council is as the most direct form of representation. There is nothing like being able to pick up your phone, have your city councilor in your phone, see them at community meetings, and elevate your issue and have that extra advocacy. So I think, you know, we were working to move things that we needed to move through the city council, and we've had great success moving that collaboratively and getting, you know, whether it's on mass and CAS or earlier in the year, issues around housing affordability and changing our requirements for more affordability and other budget items that we've moved through. But I do think that there's a lot of room for growth in terms of new councilors bringing new ideas and a sense that the city wants a more collaborative approach across all different viewpoints. So I'm excited. It's always a fun turning of the page when you start a new term and everyone gets to sort of reset and put their issues on the table, and we're going to have a great group.
So speaking of the city council, what was the vote on your rent control local option bill? Was it
11-2?
11-2. Obviously, it's a different city council, but since the four elected were progressives, I assume the vote would be the same. So we've discussed with you probably every month.
Well, actually, okay.
Is that? Oh, well, tell me.
There are some folks who are stepping down as well.
That's a good
for
point.
Example, there were changes in multiple
So we don't know,
directions.
but the bottom line is it is sitting at the State House. That's, I guess, the good news if you believe in what you call rent stabilization or rent control. The bad news is Representative Connolly, who was with us a few weeks ago, decided to drop his ballot question, and you told us you weren't sure what level or if you'd support it, even though you supported the concept. When, I guess 2 weeks ago, roughly, when the governor came out with this massive housing bond bill, it did include a variation on something you care about, this real estate transfer tax on more expensive properties. It also had this provision about accessory dwelling units as of right, so that local cities and towns couldn't screw with an effort to expand up to 900 square feet. But rent control is not there. Is this the death knell of rent control for this cycle, at least?
It won't be on the ballot in terms of a sort of voter-driven ballot initiative, but the reality is that you have to be really strategic about. It's unfortunately, you know, our democracy is very complicated in some great ways, and then in some other ways, you know, resources and financing and being able to do that really matters, and it's doing that in a presidential year is a different landscape than doing that in a non-presidential year, doing that with this group of advocates on board versus that way. It all factors in. I had signed the petition myself, you know, so I was one of those 10,000, and I still continue to support the concept. Have just sent in my strong letter of support for the home rule petition that is specific to Boston that is currently being debated in the hearing up at the State House. It's, again, one piece of our larger housing strategy. We all know that housing is dire, and this would allow us to help protect people in the short term while we're trying to close the gap between the housing supply that's needed and what we have. and also do so in a way that allows us to keep building that housing stock.
Were you
with all the other
disappointed that it wasn't included in the governor's bill? I mean, she did include, as I say, a local option real estate transfer tax, which I know, at least in concept, I don't know about the details, you support. Were you troubled that she didn't include the rent control local option in there?
I'm a half glass full kind of person usually, so I was thrilled to see transfer fee in there. That's a big deal that we're now having a statewide conversation about that, and not just within the city of Boston and the other municipalities that have moved that forward. And then when it comes to rent stabilization, that there was always I think there's a little further we need to go in terms of really ensuring that everyone understands what we're talking about. I still continue to hear concerns that are really related to the former version of what rent control looked like back in the day, several decades ago in Boston, which is in fact not what we have proposed and put forward. And
by the way, I know I've said this 1,000 times, so my apologies. Since you referenced that, when rent control was repealed on a ballot question in 1994, the 3 communities that had rent control overwhelmingly voted to keep it, and the 348 communities that didn't have it voted to repeal it, even though it had no effect on them. We're talking to the mayor of the city of Boston, Michelle Wu. The number's 877-301-8970.
And by the way, the Globe just did a big takeout on the cost of housing in Brookline, and you can see it's not just because they got rid of rent control, but that has something to do with it, because the affordable apartments that were all along Beacon Street, they all disappeared, went condo.
You can't afford to live on my street in Cambridge anymore either. It was very different when I moved in.
Anyway, the number is 877-301-8970. As we were talking about, we have the mayor with us for the next hour. Let's go to Chris in Framingham. Thank you for calling, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Chris.
Mayor Wu, can you hear me all right?
We can now.
Good morning.
Okay. So I have a question regarding rent control, and why wouldn't the focus be more on increasing the current voucher systems, the state voucher and those type of programs? Because we're already set up for those programs, and I think it could impact low-income renters a lot quicker without shifting the burden of the higher expense on everything, including rent, onto a small number of private landlords. Why don't we just spread it out through the general public, since the general public seems to want this, and not make it an us versus them scenario, and not deter future investment in rental apartments, which certainly will happen if you restrict or suppress rents below market while all the expenses stay at market, that we can just increase funding for the voucher system. And in Boston, you have the right to create your own voucher system to help low-income residents, I believe. So why not take the easier, fairer path, in my opinion?
Well, thank you for the question. First off, I would say it's truly not either or on anything related to housing. We need every possible thing we can do, and we, in fact, at the local level, have been expanding our municipal vouchers alongside advocating for more funding for state vouchers. And in fact, we've even made some changes where our affordability requirement for new housing now includes 17% affordable on-site plus 3% where vouchers would be attached to that. And as you say, this is a way for the property owner to be subsidized, so they experience it as the same as a market rate apartment, but it actually expands the geography for where our voucher holders are able to go in Boston, and helps to boost diversity within each one of our neighborhoods and in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds as well. I will just, again, challenge you, because I heard you say that this, why should we be restricting housing, new housing production by keeping rents below market? And again, this is not what our proposed rent stabilization model does. This is really what some cities around the country have already done, which is to ensure that you're preventing the most egregious rent increases, but not setting rent levels. This means that you in our case, would not be able to increase rents by double digits. Every landlord I talk to, every property owner, every financer of real estate says to me, no way are we baking in double-digit rent increases into our model. That would be unsustainable. And so, yet it still happens when people are trying to clear out a building, or when you hear so many of the specific incidents and anecdotes. It is when people are faced with one of these egregious, unnecessarily large rent increases that they can't absorb and plan for.
By the way, thank you, Chris, for your call. 877-301-8970 if you want to talk to the mayor. Are you not announcing something about multifamily housing tomorrow, from what I understand?
Yes, we are.
What is that?
So the idea is that Boston, if you look at our zoning code, we have very, very old rules. I won't get into that whole soapbox on how we need to update them. But most of our neighborhoods have housing that actually is out of compliance with the existing zoning code. In so many of the places across the city where our characteristic, call it three-decker or triple-decker, that in fact is in violation of what is permitted by right on those streets. And so as we imagine how we look at the existing footprint of where houses already are or where there might be vacant parcels, we want to think about what is the next form of housing that really is going to help us boost the supply, create more affordable homes, and think creatively about how we use those rules and update them in a way where it can be predictable and understood very easily and not a sort of home by home by home negotiation just to add to the housing supply that's needed.
David in Boston, he's calling, I think, about housing as well. Hi, David.
Hello, David.
Hey, Jim and Marjorie. Hi, Mayor Wu.
Hi there.
Hello.
Yeah, here? Are you here?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just hearing things in the background. Anyway, I'm calling about the process. I live in Mattapan on a dead-end street with only 7 houses on the street. There's an area that is at the end of the street that is a wooded type area, and now they're trying to build, or they're going to build, a 48-unit affordable housing that is going to completely destroy the street, and all the abutters around it had issues. I'm talking about, we're not against affordable housing, but with an egress on a dead-end street, this is just, it's crazy. But what I'm really talking about is the process. The process that we went through with the developers. We had multiple meetings over and over again trying to work with them. And then we go to the ISD for an appeals process, and we're told that everything was all set, everything was all in motion. We have people from your office who are speaking under the cuff and saying, I know this is wrong, but this is how it's going. In that meeting, there was racially insensitive comments. There was all kinds of things that were egregious. And I just think that if we're just going to ram down these huge buildings on individual streets, none of the neighbors have any input. I just think it's just modern day neo-colonization, what needs to be stopped.
Okay, let's hear what the mayor has to say. David, thanks for the call.
David, I'm so sorry that it sounds like a very frustrating experience and one that we're trying to change across the board, because what you're talking about is exactly what I know neighborhoods all across the city have gone through, which is you feel like there's a process set up for community engagement, but in fact, this mismatch between what the rules say and what actually happens in practice ends up making it so that you question whether there's a point to being involved at all. We need to update the rules so that they're real, they're modern, we stick to them, and everyone, developers and community members, have a good sense of what is likely to happen. I'm going to look into this situation. If you're able to stay on, I would love to just make sure we get the address and street from you, just so I can check into it, particularly around what you're saying, if there was some inappropriate behavior that happened at the meetings, and to check into that. I will just say what we're trying to do with the zoning code is to avoid these situations where, in the past we've said we need more housing, but then kept silent on where it should go. And then you get these battles one by one where those neighborhoods that might be more well-resourced or organized, or someone knows someone who knows someone, they end up being able to sort of fight back against a project, whereas in other places it doesn't happen, and then it counts to the housing goals. It needs to be equitable across the board, and we need to have that consistency in terms of how we do this in different parts of the city. And the only way we get to that is by making sure the rules are real. So I'd love to follow up.
David, can you stay on hold? And one of our producers will get the information the mayor is looking for, address, etc. So do not go away. Someone will pick up your call in a second. Thank you for the call.
We have a text from Maria from Jamaica Plain, who wants to know about the resignation of most of the Committee on English Language Learners. They were critical of the Wu administration walking away from the research-based data. She says it's research-based. I'm not sure, but that informs that English is second language. Kids need to receive education in their native language as well as instruction to learn English.
So I am incredibly grateful to the committee members who had served. Some of these leaders had been part of this city's this particular task force for over a decade, and what was, I think, maybe envisioned as a shorter term appointment has ended up being a lot of their time over many, many years, and we're very grateful for it. I think there's as I understand it, a little bit of a divergence between what our superintendent and chief of academics in the district would say is backed by research in terms of national best practices around how to support multilingual learners, and what is perceived as the maybe only or best way to do multilingual education. Our district fully supports expanding multilingual education. We know that it's not only a need in the district, but such a value add for our young people in today's global economy. And how we go about doing that in the best way, I think, is a little bit of what's at issue here. As I understand it, some of the task force members have been advocating for a return to our previous approach prior to state law had even changed from a while ago, where there was much greater separation and multilingual learners would receive instruction only in their home language or language they were most comfortable in for all subjects separate from other students. Our goal now is to reach truly inclusive education, which means providing supports where students need them individually, but wherever possible, not walling off whole populations of students from the entire rest of their school communities. And so that means, of course, providing adequate and intensive English language and native language instruction where necessary, but finding opportunities to help support students as they are progressing in their English fluency to be able to experience education alongside their English-speaking peers, English-fluent peers as well. And so that's, there's a lot of detail and nuance in that, but I think that's the best way at a high level to describe the kind of difference in opinion there. And the superintendent and her team feel very strongly that this is the direction that nationally education experts have put their weight behind, and I stand behind the superintendent in her judgment.
Just as a quick aside, I know in Brookline, which is a town many people in Boston leave from Boston, and they go to Brookline because they think the schools are better there. The schools are very good in Brookline. A massive influx of Russian kids a few years back, and they did this thing that you are talking about, which is have the kids learn Russian, be taught in Russian for part of the day, and then go back in with the English-speaking kids, so they wouldn't be segregated from the English-speaking kids. They would learn English faster. And I thought the research, because this was debated in Brookline, was just the opposite, that the faster you can integrate children, the better, as opposed to not having them. Because if you can't understand English in school, when the school is predominantly English, it's difficult for you at recess, it's difficult for you in the cafeteria, it's difficult for you in the bus. So it seems that the faster, and kids are very supple at that age too. So I was surprised this was even a big, huge controversy.
Yeah, and again, that's my understanding of where the national research is, as well as what the state requirements are for education, is trying to ensure it's as inclusive as possible. I will say, I just want to emphasize, though, that we are not trying to return to the old days
Correct.
of saying, actually, English is the only, appropriate or proper form of communication, and erasing people's identities. We're building multicultural, multilingual communities, and our goal is just to ensure that everyone is included in as many environments of that as possible.
Mayor Wu, the other day you decided to pull out of the possibility of being involved in this pilot program to ban fossil fuels in buildings. Roughly 70% of Boston's greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. I know you were pretty excited about this. There were 9 of the 10 slots the legislature approved that basically said that there couldn't be fossil fuels in new buildings that were constructed. Why did you decide? A lot of people disappointed in your decision. Why did you decide to pull out?
Yeah, I'm glad to get a little time on this because there's a lot to unpack here. And I just want to say first on the top, this was in no way related to any kind of lobbying by any group or interest or community. I mean, if anything at all, we heard very, very strong support for the city of Boston to undertake this and to move in this direction. It's very challenging to to think that we are not going to be eligible for this program, but we are going to go about it a different way. Basically, this law was written before I came into office, around 10 communities that had already taken certain steps in this direction, and it really was modeled and built off of the understanding that Boston would not be part of it. And then under the new state administration, after it had passed, there were different rules and regulations that were put out to provide specifics of how to apply on a pretty quick timeline, given the fact that these communities were already 90% set and there was one slot available. We at the end were weighing whether we should try to jam ourselves into a program where we had received some indications that Boston likely would not be picked, or there was a smaller chance that we would be picked for that last slot, just given how the program was rolling out. And yet, as part of the requirements to apply for the program, we needed to put forward a fully fleshed out ordinance and legislation around how exactly we would ramp into fossil fuel-free regulations, by what timelines, and how we would differ from the model code that the state had released in June. Now, in Boston, we are very different scale in terms of the other cities that are part of this program already, different diversity of uses and building types, and to engage our communities appropriately on putting forward the exact ordinance on how we would enter this program, we simply could not do that in a thoughtful way in time for the deadlines that they had. And so we had to make a choice of, do we rush the engagement with community to do this by the deadline for a program that there was little chance that we were actually going to get selected for, or to find a way to try to expand the program, advocate, but basically give up that last slot to do it a different way for Boston and reach it through a more meaningful and sustained community effort. I know this is very long already, but
take your time.
Just so people understand what we're actually talking about, what is the program and how far are we from being fossil fuel free in Boston? As you said, buildings are the majority of our emissions, and the 5% of the 5% of the largest buildings make up 40% of our total emissions. Not 40% of the buildings, 40% of all emissions comes from 5% of our buildings. We already have regulations on the books with authority from the state to regulate those buildings' energy efficiency and emissions through Article 80 of our zoning code, Article 37, which is a climate resiliency code, and the Boston Emissions Reductions and Disclosure Ordinance called BERDO. And so those buildings are being phased into full fossil fuel-free compliance on a timeline already. What we intend to do is to accelerate that with zoning code changes and other things that we can do at the city level to close the rest of the gap on those largest buildings of 5%. For the rest of the 30% of emissions that the smaller buildings make up, 20,000 square feet or smaller, we have opted into the state's specialized energy stretch code earlier this year, which the state made available to municipalities. And that program makes it so that all new construction of, again, all buildings, but in this case for us, the smaller buildings especially, must either be all electric, or they basically are heavily disincentivized from having fossil fuel hookups. But there is a path where you can still have fossil fuel hookups if you install solar panels and pre-wire the entire building for future electric hookups. That's the only way to still use fossil fuels under that. So what the 10 communities program that we didn't apply to would have allowed us to do is, again, not for the big buildings because we can do that on our own, but for those smaller buildings where it's already not captured by the specialized energy stretch code, that last portion of people wanting to use the pathway that requires solar panels and pre-wiring for electric to close off that possibility and just require electric. That's the last gap that remains from what we can do on our own and what we could have done with the state program that, again, we were told we probably wouldn't get into. And so we're going to try to grab that last gap as well through a home rule petition on our own, on the right timeline to fully engage our workforce throughout the city, stakeholders, and to do so in a way that hopefully paves the way for more than just 10 communities to be able to do this all together.
A couple of questions about this, if I may. You said at the beginning of your answer, Mayor Wu, that no group no industry group had influence. There is something called the NAIOP, Massachusetts Commercial Real Estate Development Trade Group, quoted in the Globe, their spokesperson said, "We are pleased the mayor recognizes the challenges associated with the fossil fuel ban at this time, et cetera, et cetera." How do you react to what she had to say?
I mean, I so appreciate their perspective, especially in a very difficult time for the economy, that with interest rates as high as they are and with the city pushing for more housing and trying to make it work financially, I recognize that in the very, very short term, this can be perceived as increasing the costs to use, new technology versus just the old standard ways of doing things. Over the long run, we all know that this ends up saving all of us money, both in terms of the damage that's avoided from extreme weather, having flooding consequences, or et cetera, or even the utilities costs and the energy efficiency gains that are realized over the medium term for the property owners as well. Truly, the decision was not about whether we want to move forward and be a fossil fuel-free city or not. We are doing it one way or the other. We are also committed to doing it in a way that brings along our entire workforce, including those who will need to transition away from fossil fuel industries. And so for us, it was just that we couldn't meet the window where the application was due with the appropriate community outreach, and rather than choose one or the other to rush this through but not do that part right, we are going to do what we can on our own and then try to close that last gap with a home rule petition that we will do the appropriate outreach
One
for.
last thing, unlike you who knows everything about this, everything I learned last night reading emails from people who actually almost all said they were fans of yours and admired your leadership in the environment, didn't like this decision. They disagreed with your assessment that Boston would have lost this effort. And the things they cited was the level of diversity in this community that separated it from the 9 wealthier communities that have gotten it already. The fact that all 9 of those communities have a median income that is higher than the state median income as opposed to Boston, which is
Were any of them the
lower.
state that was actually going to be making the choice?
No, but so did you get a representation from the state?
We were in constant conversations with the state.
And they basically said it wasn't going to happen.
While we were never told outright that there was 0 chance we were going to get it, this was not a program that was designed for the city of Boston to get into, and for us to do it in a way that, it was essentially going to come down to playing a game of chicken with the state at the end. There are challenges for Boston getting into this on such a short timeline without that engagement. Both a very real acknowledgement of needing to be aware of and working towards our electric grid capacity and how we partner on ensuring there's the right substations in the right places and the infrastructure investments that need to be made, as well as the transition for workers. We understood it to be very difficult for Boston to be selected.
Okay, let's go to Dan in Dorchester. You're on with the mayor of the city of Boston, Michelle Wu. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Mayor. I have a quick question. I live in Dorchester, and at one point with all the one-way streets, we were going to get speed bumps to help calm down people driving through our streets. But I just heard from a friend that even though there was a study done pre-COVID, now that you guys are holding back on the program and are going to do another study. And I was just wondering why there needs to be another study if we already knew. And I mean, in all honesty, the street that I live on, people are ridiculous and are always going so fast down that street, to the point where we've had a car flip on our street, and my personal car one time got destroyed because someone was speeding down the street.
Dan, this is a horrible connection. Do you understand what
Yep.
Dan, we're going to cut you off only. I think the mayor understands why you're calling,
And again,
it's bad connection.
I'd love
Thank
to
you.
make sure that you have the right information about your particular street, because I know there are parts of Dorchester that are slated for speed bumps, and so
You want him to hold on?
I would love if we can get your street. That would be very helpful.
Stick around, Dan. Producer will get the info.
And I'll
Sorry.
say, so if the information that you're getting is right from your friend, I want to explain a little bit of where our program is. We want to do more speed humps throughout the city. We know it's necessary for safety, especially on many of our residential side streets that are becoming cut-throughs with different navigation apps and all that. What we're trying to do differently is, 1, do more faster each year, but 2, do them in zones and not individual streets at a time. Because what we see happen when you do one street at a time is the cars just end up going to your neighbor's street, the next one over, and we're pushing the problem that direction. So if it's true that there might need to be some restudy, I imagine that what it is ensuring that we're doing the whole zone and studying the streets around it so that we can do this properly for the whole area and not just kind of push the problem one over for your neighbors to then start mobilizing to get speed humps, but to do it in a way that's comprehensive and will actually have impact.
Dan, don't go away. We're going to get your street information and take it from there.
We have a question from the homie mic there about the schools. A school question there, I believe, from
Hi.
Avril.
I'm a Boston resident of the Leather District.
What's your name?
Averill.
Hi, Averill.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. So my question is, will there be a change to the new inequitable exam school policy, especially since there have been so many high-achieving students denied seats, and they have become unintended consequences?
So thank you, first of all, for coming here and for your question. The superintendent gave a little bit of an update on this to the school committee just recently. We now have 1 year of data from the full policy being implemented that was envisioned and set now several years ago, I think somewhere around 2020 or so. And so there's only been 1 year of evaluation, and I think for anything that we want to just have a firm handle on, we need to have more data, as the superintendent has been saying. I think one issue that has come up the most that I've heard about is this issue of the 10 points that go to schools where more than 40% of the student population is considered at or below, or receiving supports for being at or below the poverty line. And the practical consequences have been that all but something like 7 schools within the city of Boston, feeder schools, have these extra points. And so for students at those 7 that are above the 40% threshold, or sorry, below the 40% threshold, and therefore not getting the points, there have been instances where even if they have, I think there was one student with a perfect score on the tests and great, all A's, and did not receive their first choice exam school. And so it's again, this issue is one where we, as a city, I know across the board, want to ensure that all of the seats at all of our high schools are high quality, and that the processes to decide the exam schools in particular make sense for representation across our school communities, across our neighborhoods, across different backgrounds in the city. And I know this is an issue that the superintendent wants to continue working on and ensuring that we have the right data analysis to back this up. But it's no matter what changes we make to this, the real solution is that we need every single high school seat to be one where people feel proud to attend and that they understand are well-resourced. I have a huge focus on ensuring that we're doing this across every high school. And some of the changes we've proposed so far, including the ability to expand Madison Park Vocational Technical High School significantly, the ability to expand the O'Brien Exam School significantly, adding early college across all of our high schools, starting with Charlestown High School with the first direct partnership, so every single student will have access to early college and as many courses free of charge as they would like to take. Key signature partnerships that we're continuing to work on where different colleges like UMass or Boston College are leaning in and helping us to adopt specific high schools, so we're creating quality options everywhere. And then career pathways that partners in different sectors like healthcare, for example, are really leaning in with the city. So we are moving as fast as we can on all fronts, and I definitely hear and know this issue as one that is firmly on the list for us to think about and take action on in the context of all the high schools.
Averill, thanks for the question. We appreciate it.
We're talking to Michelle Wu, the mayor of the city of Boston. She's going to be with us for about a half hour. Our number is 877-301-8970. If you want to call us or text us, we are broadcasting live at Boston Public Library and streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Join us for GBH's virtual Ask the Expert event, all about birding migration. We'll be speaking with author and illustrator David Allen Sibley to talk all about birding. He'll answer any of your questions about what triggers migration and how birds find their way to warmer climates. This is a free virtual event, and you can join the discussion on Friday, November 17th at noon. Sign up online at gbh.org/events.
Support for our programs comes from you and Rockland Trust Bank, dedicated to providing advice and support to the community for over 115 years. More at rocklandtrust.com. Rockland Trust Bank, where each relationship matters. Member FDIC. And Mass General Brigham Health Plan, a health plan connected to a world-leading healthcare system, committed to providing innovative plans, coverage, and a broad network of doctors. Learn more at massgeneralbrighamhealthplan.org.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan, Jim Browdy. We're live at the library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News, YouTube.com/GBH News. If you're just joining us, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu is here till a little bit after the bottom of the hour for the monthly Ask the Mayor. You can talk to her by texting her or calling her at 877-301-8970.
You know, Mayor Wu, we're just talking about high schools and getting into exam schools in Boston, and I know we've talked a lot about some of the schools in Boston not being in great repair. We talked with Paul Revel, who used to be the Secretary of Education, a couple of weeks ago about what they've done in Baltimore, which is that they did something extremely controversial, which is they closed a lot of schools that had been under attended and were kind of in really bad shape, to spend a lot of money on revamping a lot of the schools. I know in Boston, people get very upset when you close the school, and I get it, because your kid has been there and you like the school, and maybe it's a neighborhood school and all that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of under-attended schools in Boston that are in pretty bad shape that you still have to heat and light and service and all that kind of stuff. I mean, would Baltimore have any appeal to you, what they did?
So the lessons that I drew from Baltimore, as I understand it, was that they created a fund through the state legislature specifically for that center city. We have the MSBA here, the Mass School Building Authority, which helps pay for and reimburse local school districts for new buildings. But because their budget line item is so small and there are so many districts all across the state that need new buildings, it's very rare that any district can get more than one school in at a time, and that it's a multi-year process to even get through to be awarded with them, and they've been able to help fewer and fewer because their resources are constrained. And so I would love to have a Boston-specific state fund to help us with that. We definitely need the resources. I will say on the closure question, I don't think it's, everything that we do in city government, of course, is about trade-offs and the financial resources that we have versus what we are trying to do. But it's not, it's a convenient narrative to say that, we have all these schools that just need to be closed down because they're, empty and not doing well. If you actually go and visit all of our school communities, there are incredible educators. There are children who are just so inspiring, and it's really not a matter, it's incredibly traumatic to close any school community. We should never be doing that because we feel right now in this moment that we can't pay for a school. The reason why we should make any changes to facilities, whether it's mergers or new builds or changes in where communities should be located or where it sits on its own, is about the student experience there. We do have some, for example, very, very old buildings that are simply not in the condition that they should be. The bathrooms need to be updated. They don't have, even if everything is safe and fine from a sort of basic health and life safety perspective, they don't have science labs that are up to date for our young people. They don't have performing arts spaces. They don't have group rooms that for different types of group work that happens in school these days. And so, and then others of our buildings are very, very small. And in fact, there's only one class per grade, which means when you only have one class, you can't do larger activities like having multiple AP classes to choose from, or sports programs that have enough students to sustain a team. And so we have been working for over a year now to put together a facilities condition assessment on the real-time status of every component of our schools, the boiler, whether there's a gym, how functional is it, do they have an auditorium, do they have space for a music room, this and that and the other. That is going to be now maintained in real time, because before the district had done one or two snapshots in the past, but they very quickly became outdated as components aged. And so this is now a real-time what we call FCA facilities condition assessment that will be updated, so we always know where the most dire needs are. We also now have a rubric that we've been working on that can help share where buildings do not meet the high-quality student experience expectations that we have for a school, whether they don't have the appropriate spaces or their sort of scale doesn't support the diversity and breadth of offerings academically or extracurricularly that we would like to see. And it doesn't mean that now, we're a district that has been built up over 400 years, so there's always going to be exceptions and some smaller schools that will exist and some larger schools that will exist. But we wanted to have some consistency to the planning of it and ensure that as we build out, what does a large high school look like? What does a medium or smaller size high school look like? And what is just the cutoff where we don't think that that is actually sustainable for an adequate experience for our young people? And then we start moving around the pieces to understand how we equitably go about fixing that.
Let's go to Brighton, where we ordinarily are, at least 3 days a week. Andrew is next on Boston Public Radio with the mayor of the city of Boston. Hey there, Andrew. What's up?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for taking the call, and
Good.
Thanks for doing this, Mayor Wu.
Thank you.
I'm calling because I'm interested if it's ever crossed your mind, crossed the city's mind, or if there's any planning or discussion about either merging or annexing some of the local communities like Cambridge, Somerville, Everett, Brookline, or something like that.
Wait a minute. Why would we do that, Andrew?
I love the idea,
You
but
do?
annexing,
Okay.
That's a great question. How about it, Mayor Wu?
I will admit, I will confess, I was just sharing half in jest at a dinner a couple last week that, if you think about the challenges when it comes to resources for our school system and housing opportunities in most other cities, major cities, the footprint that Boston would occupy would actually include much of the kind of greater Boston area. They all have that within one municipality, and it just means there's more opportunity for the diversity of all different needs and resources to be at the table together. And in fact, as we think about where our school system is headed into the 50th anniversary of busing in Boston, forced desegregation because the Boston School Committee refused to engage in ensuring there would be integrated school systems, part of the kind of suburbanization of, and walling off of resources, community by community, has played out across our education system nationally. Anyway, if I ever get to like a 10th term in office, maybe we can pick up the annexation effort again.
Andrew, thank you. Why don't you follow one of those local option things with the legislature and see what they think. Mayor Wu, we have discussed almost every month for months the complaint against a captain on the Boston Police Force, John, and he's nicknamed Pepperjack Danilecki. You said we knew based on reporting, Internal Affairs was looking at it. It was on Commissioner Cox's desk, and ultimately he'd make a report and make a decision. He told us several weeks ago that he had made a decision. It would be released imminently. It was released a little later. I have great respect for Commissioner Cox. However, he did, I think, unintentionally misrepresent something. He said the original reporting that the Globe did, in which it said that Internal Affairs had found Captain Danilecki to have used excessive force and lied, wasn't true. In fact, it was true. From what I understand, is the commissioner decided, for reasons that I hope you can share with us, to send it back to Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs reversed itself, dropped the excessive force thing, and there were a couple of minor charges. You were quoted in a Globe story as saying it's fairly routine, from what you understand, for these things to be set back. Tom Nolan, a criminologist and former Boston cops, said it's not routinely done. We had Howard Friedman on the show the other day, who I'm sure you know or know of, who obviously is a noted civil rights lawyer who gets involved in a lot of these police misconduct cases, including some, not this one, with Captain Danilecki. He said it's not routinely done. I guess there's several questions. One, do you know why the commissioner did send it back? And two, this is the 9th excessive force charge from what the Globe reports against Captain Danilecki, every single one of which has been found not to be substantiated. Are you concerned about the outcome here?
So I just want to try to provide some clarity here because I have been very thoroughly immersed in this and just wanting to ensure that I could understand the process and this specific situation and also the commissioner's comments about it. So I think it's, Boston Police is it's a very structured organization, and specific words have specific meaning. And so the word finding has a very specific legal meaning within the department's internal processes, and that a finding is reached when a commissioner signs off on the recommendations that come up from below. And so when he says that there was no finding reached on that, he did not mean that the investigators had not offered a recommendation one way, but he meant that there was no finding because that word is used when it becomes final. And so when, I don't know exactly what the article said, and what was, misreporting or not misreporting or all of that, but it was not, usually, and this was a situation that particularly happened here, usually the partial results are in fact not released to the media because until an investigation is final, precisely because there are different procedural steps that need to be taken that can and sometimes do involve multiple rounds of going down, making sure that this kind of analysis was included in the due diligence, and then making sure to follow that line of questioning all the way through, and then reaching, signing off when the commissioner feels comfortable. Here in this case, Commissioner Cox started a year and about 3 months ago at this point. We inherited some outstanding open internal affairs cases that some of them had been lingering for years prior to him even starting on the job. And then, of course, he needed to put his infrastructure in place and get, ramped up and all of that. And so now he has been working very diligently to clear that backlog because we should never have a multi-year situation drag on. With this particular situation, I think, again, there's some conflation also. First of all, some of the incidents that you're mentioning here in the total number, and I think sometimes are discussed in the media all in the same breath, those were separate complaints that were actually resolved before I or the commissioner were in our roles, and so we do not open back up past adjudications or anything like that.
But it is true there have been 9 excessive force charges filed against him.
I don't know the number, but I will take your word for it. I know there have been multiple. And in this case, what he inherited as an open case was very specific in terms of the incident and the complaints that were before him. And he reached a conclusion based on, I stand by Commissioner Cox's leadership because he just knows the department inside out and has a very thoughtful, comprehensive vision for where the department is headed. And in this case in particular, he oversaw internal affairs himself for multiple years, and so he knows that part even more inside out. When he says that certain types of analysis should have been completed and wanted to make sure that they were done and sent that back, they need to, that is part of doing the due diligence.
Doesn't that make you nervous about internal affairs then? I mean, if he made the right decision.
Again, he inherited this and has now put in his own people into all different roles. And looking back, this is, a transition period that I think he and I are working to wrap up. But there were some ways where he set the new direction for how these things should go. And some of the things that we have to look backwards and take care of, he has taken care of. And with Captain Danilecki, there are multiple career pathways, even in terms of being a police officer. Some officers tend to be in more administrative roles or have very little interaction with the public if they're doing, investigatory work of a certain type or they're brought in certain situations. And then others have a career trajectory where they are more frequently in front of the members of the public in very high pressure, volatile situations. And so I know he's been on the front lines of many situations like that. And each one of those has been adjudicated in the past, some before Commissioner Cox got here, some now after. And I stand by the commissioner and the department in their leadership and know that we are headed in the right direction for BPD.
Can you share with us specifically why he did send it back to Internal Affairs? Or?
These are all internal processes that are sensitive, and I don't want to get into every little detail of it. But there were, when a use of force complaint is alleged, there are certain types of analysis that need to be walked through all the way, and he wanted to make sure that they were done fully.
And you're comfortable that Captain Danilecki is on the streets?
Yes.
Okay.
We should say, by the way, that Commissioner Cox was going to come
Oh,
on.
yes.
He offered to come on today, but we didn't get the offer till yesterday mid-afternoon. It was too late for us to rejigger things, so we will have him on again as soon as it
He said,
works.
his spokesperson said that he would join us shortly after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's the update. He's going to be here shortly after Thanksgiving. Mayor, we're getting a lot of texts.
Can I just add one point, too, on that?
Sure,
so, what's been on my mind a lot lately is, in terms of BPD and what it looks like on the ground, and having the chance to really observe and see how they do what they do, has been the effort around mass and CAS, for example.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
I think there's a little bit of a connection point here in one, again, addressing situations from way back. Anytime you're looking back on a years old conversation or interaction, it's very, very difficult to feel as confident as you would if you were addressing something right away and could sort of talk to people live and have that. And I think we don't, one other point that has changed from before until now is the widespread adoption of body cameras. And, when those weren't in place before across the force, there were, it was like, could you get a camera, a view from this camera that happened to be stationed on the light pole, or, some other snippet from far away. Whereas now it's very, it's just very straightforward that everybody knows that these interactions are recorded, they're available, they are, they're on the record for everyone. And so, in terms of where we are as a force now, that is one very significant thing that I think does factor in day to day for everyone, including members of the public. And in terms of how the interaction at Mass and Cass went, with Captain Danilecki being a very important part of the on-the-ground effort, as many precincts and districts were pulled into that, we saw that the cooperation, the collaboration between BPD, the Boston Public Health Commission, and our outreach workers, our community partners, couldn't have been more seamless. And I was always blown away to see our officers know every single person's name, to be sharing their joy at what progress they might be making in their own recovery journey, and they're very invested in the work that's happening on the ground. One last point I want to make on this is we also recently graduated the largest in a long time police class. Our new recruit class graduated a couple weeks ago now. Most diverse class, and nearly double the size of the standard classes back in the day, as we're trying to boost our staffing and ensure that we're fully reflective of and representative of our communities. But there's one member in the class who I got the chance to speak to, who is 47 years old, which is rare, right? There's an age cutoff to even apply to be an officer, and this is well beyond that. But what had happened in this case, he's a leader within the Vietnamese community in Boston, and he had been in the class in 2017, but at the end of it had, I think, twisted his ankle or had a physical injury where he wasn't able to finish the class and graduate. And so went through a lot of hoops and even legislative actions to be able to get an exception to go back and participate. And so he did it once in 2017 and then just graduated a couple weeks ago. But what he was sharing with me was that he was shocked at how different the experience was 6 years ago versus now under Commissioner Cox, where he said before it was very much about physical tactics to get a weapon away from someone or, sort of disarm a situation, versus their work now of mental health and understanding how to de-escalate a situation appropriately, being out in community, shadowing for an entire week community service officers and being out and asked to just be involved as part of their training, thinking very intentionally about what other services from other departments might need to be looped in. So in many ways, seen and unseen, this department is moving in a new direction that I think is best positioned to serve our residents.
You mentioned Massachusetts Avenue and Melanie Cass Boulevard, the tent city people called it, that was down there. They're gone now. What is the update on how people that were there, where are they? Do we know?
Yep, there were 102 residents who needed housing and shelter and were connected to individualized placements. This came through weeks, months in some cases of one-on-one conversations to really understand what medical needs needed to be addressed, what other sort of life situations needed to be taken into account. 70-some of those residents went into a low-threshold housing placement and with wraparound medical services. Another 20-some, I believe, went into a shelter placement that was appropriate, and some were reunified with family members and actually were able to access housing with their support networks elsewhere. By the end, even 3 pups were placed. The last few tents were residents with dogs who really wanted to make sure that they could keep their beloved family member with them, and our team, again, BPD, BPHC, our coordinated response team, housing and community partners, went above and beyond to find the shelters that would allow for dogs, and then there was a requirement that to have a dog there that had to be vaccinated, so then they drove the dog over to get the vaccinations, and there were no arrests made in enforcement of the mask and cast ordinance at all, still to this date, and there's been a sustained effort now where all of the staffing that had been previously required just to sustain and keep the peace and try to manage a situation where hundreds of people were gathering in pretty dangerous, unsafe conditions. Now that everyone's been connected to housing and shelter, and that large gathering situation no longer exists, our staffing is redirected towards mobile outreach to actually engage one-on-one with people all throughout the city, every neighborhood, to connect folks to housing and services.
You usually bring something that has a city connection. What's in there?
Yes, so this is a bag of bags and hats that supports our composting efforts
Thank you kindly.
in the city.
Oh! And
this is to highlight that we have slots still available. So anyway, I will. There's multiple of everything here. We still have spaces available to join the City of Boston's free curbside composting program. Gets picked up the same time as your trash. You get a little mini cute green bin that gets rolled out to the curb, and then one that sits on your counter where all the food waste and compostable materials go inside. And it diverts out of our trash system, and we hope more people will sign up.
You're going to ask the rat question from Sue?
Well, I was going to say our media maven, Sue O'Connell, who visits us all the time from NBC 10 Boston, she's very interested in composting because she thinks it will help the rat problem if more people do compost. I'm a new composter, and I have to say it makes me feel much less guilty about the food that I waste. And you can't believe how much food you do waste when you put it all in one of these containers. Yeah. But she is concerned about the rats in Roxbury. I think she lives in Fort Hill. I'm not sure. And somebody else just texted a little while ago concerned about how you were going to kill the rats when the rats get out of control and wants to make sure the city doesn't use rat poison because they're worried about the owls and the raccoons and the hawks and everybody else eating the rat poison.
Okay, rats is a big focus and priority here. We have been tracking rat complaints and just trying to understand if any changes in how we pick up trash or how the city has run have had an impact. It really does seem like through the pandemic, when more people were at home and eating more meals at home, and the sort of dispersal of where food sources could be were all throughout our neighborhoods, we did see a corresponding then rise in the reports of needing help with rodent control. The only way, we can set however many traps we want, and I will check on the sort of
rat poison
issue just to be sure. But the only way to actually get at the root of this is to take away the food sources, and so we need to move towards more containers that are
as opposed to plastic bags,
rat-proof. Yeah. Instead of just having trash bags out all over the place and having food in each of those trash bags. So composting does have a bit to do with that. There's a very compact container that holds all that food, and then it's also removed from the rest of the trash, hopefully, in that household.
I know you only have a minute or so left, but you spoke at a prayer service the other day, an event hosted by the Muslim community for people to pray for Palestinians in Gaza. There's a lot of debate in this country about whether the Biden administration is putting enough pressure on Israel to be more proportional, I guess the word of art is, in terms of what it's doing to civilians there, allegedly having killed more than 10,000, more than 4,000 kids, according to the Palestinian Health Authority, in an attempt to ferret out the leaders of Hamas. Are you comfortable with what the Biden administration has been doing?
I am. I'm not an expert in foreign relations, and certainly on incredibly complex generational issues. You know, I stay in my lane at the city level. What I see in terms of the images, the numbers, the babies, the children who have been killed, it's horrific. And, you know, as a world, for me, the adding to how much pain there is in watching the suffering on all sides, right? Everyone should have the right to live freely, right, and not be taken hostage or bombed or you know, people end up being on the table when it comes to larger geopolitical conflicts that are in play. And I wish we were at a place in the world where there could be some coordinated end game for all of this, because I don't know where this is headed, and it's having a tremendous impact on the city of Boston in terms of the direct connections that we have to family members in Israel, in Gaza, in all of the surrounding areas, and we feel it every single day.
The congressperson who represents Boston, Ayanna Pressley, urged the president to urge Israel to declare a ceasefire. Do you share that view?
You know, I don't. My job is to focus on how to support our residents here on the ground, and so I don't trust myself enough to be an expert, and haven't put in the deep study that's required to feel solid on this. But I see horrible things happening in the world, and I want to make sure that we are creating a city that is safe for everyone here, everyone of different views and perspectives, to feel part of our community. And I know, during the pandemic, for example, when there was much rhetoric around China and their role in the pandemic that was amplified through sort of racist, xenophobic remarks by the former president and others, there was a tremendous backlash on that Asian Americans felt all throughout the country. And here, again, the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of Islamophobia, the incidents that we've seen around the country of even lives lost from that kind of violence that seems very much connected to the rise of hate at the root of seeing what's happening. We have to hold together as a community, create space for dialogue, create space for people to have different views, and to support and advocate for what we believe is the best position in all cases. But to here, where it matters so much, also recognize our humanity, recognize each other's humanity, and ensure that we are not giving, trading that off to, in these larger currents that are really sweeping everywhere.
Mayor Wu, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.